But I am delighted to be able to introduce our speaker tonight. He grew up in Wisconsin. He went to the university there and majored in art and followed through on his major, which is kind of unusual.
Oh, yes.
But he's also, a leader, and he was talking to me at dinner about his abilities and his work and his challenges as a leader of the Sonoran Plein Air Associate Group. And so he helps to nurture and support other artists, as does Denise. So I've been looking through his art this last week, and Denise's as well. And what is interesting to me is their juxtaposition of architecture, very often very simple barrio architecture, and the natural habitat. So the angular architecture against the curves and space of nature. And so with that, I'd like to ask you to join me in giving a warm Friends of Western Art welcome to Greg Wallace.
Yay. Thank you. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Good evening. And thanks again to the Friends of Western Art for inviting me. It's a great honor to be here. And it's in some ways kind of a long journey too, because I moved to Tucson in 1980 and looked around for a while, and I was fresh out of art school and decided not to go be a teacher at that point, like in either public or continue at the university level, and decided to just sort of go have at it, so to speak. And I ended up getting a job at a place that was around for quite a while back then called Rosquist Galleries. And I worked there full time for 5 years, and I met a lot of interesting people. One of them was my friend Micah Ewing, and we both showed there for quite some time. And other people, like I'm familiar coming in here and seeing Ross Stefan. It was nice. It was a privilege to be able to meet some of these people firsthand back then. So it's kind of a surprise to me now to have the opportunity to come back here full circle, so to speak, because my initial introduction to the Mountain Oyster Club and the group and the people that were involved back then, I got to meet somebody like John, or everybody called him Jack Goodman back then. So I remember going to, he used to host wonderful art parties and stuff at his house up in the foothills. So he was just a delightful person. And one of the most unassuming people I ever met, too. I mean, the first time I saw him drive up to Rosquist Galleries, he showed up in what looked like a used car. And he came in the gallery, you'd never know. He was like Jack Goodman that ran the Mountain Oyster Club that did all these wonderful things that was so supportive of the arts. So it's been it's an interesting journey, and it's certainly an honor to be here. And it's nice to still be involved in some ways. The longer you're in the arts, you realize that an awful lot of it has to do with kind of how much you have invested in it and whether you're still doing it 50 years later. So, and it becomes, I'll talk about that a little bit more later on, but it all comes around to sort of discovering the spirit of what we do. And it's more than just picture making. It's more than just becoming some attempt to become commercially successful or, notoriety or branding or something like that. There is an effort here to be involved with something that feels spiritual, that feels like it has purpose, that it reinforces the idea of that aesthetics themselves are important. It's the way we all feel connected, It's a language that sort of connects us all, that we all understand at certain levels. So some of the descriptions of how I paint tonight hopefully describe maybe and help expand people's own personal conversation and language that give them more confidence in how they relate to the artwork that they feel like they connect to. And, as artists, we're all sort of reinventing the wheel, so to speak, but we rely a lot on everyone who's come before us. And that's true with, and that includes collectors and just art lovers, too. We're all of the same community in some ways. We're all, it's all a wonderful conversation in terms of like reinforcing that life is precious and that wonder is miraculous. We like to believe that life has meaning. So anyway, tonight I'd like to talk a little bit about using my art and my experiences as an example. Sort of beyond pictures, there's more here than just sort of a more simple idea of just representation. And the longer I've done this, the more I've got involved with what I call gestural shorthand. And it's always fascinated me, and the more painting becomes a way to become more intuitive and hopefully more evocative by actually pursuing the idea of less is more. So I like to take complicated things and figure out, kind of distill them down to the simplest and hopefully in some ways more intriguing and intuitive description of them. And I think in some ways it helps the viewer of these things to be more engaged because it allows people to sort of fill in the blanks, so to speak. You set people up to project their own life experiences into what they look. And in some ways, that almost becomes more real than any kind of absolute increased description of detail and things like that. People are allowed to, and the human mind tends to fill in that. You set people up to see things in like that, and I think in some ways it can be more persuasive. So, beyond pictures, gestural poetry, my journey to expressive solutions in painting. I start out with just a couple of examples of what I do. Because I had sort of a transformative period. And this is about the time that I met my friend Denise to get more involved with plein air painting. And it's a little different activity, and it's a little different challenge than studio painting from my perspective. And it's sort of increased my curiosity and sort of the necessity to work up with what I call sort of visual shorthand. And because if you want to go out and you spend any time doing it on a regular basis, it's discouraging to go out and do something brilliant one day, and then you go out the next day and nothing. It's just like, oh my God, maybe I don't know what I'm doing. It's like, so you figure out ways, eventually, for me anyway, figure out ways to sort of reverse engineer my successes and my failures at some point. And I even got into a period where, just for my own personal use, I set up and did sort of time-lapse things of myself plein air painting, just to sort of follow through to see what happened, when I was no longer involved with that process. So I could kind of see like, oh, that's where I went off track. Everything was going great until I did that, and then it sort of destroyed and derailed the whole process. So that led to creating kind of a template or at least a program for myself in terms of like staging, I called it. So you would have a certain build in mind. And once you set yourself up for certain parameters, and I like to make a lot of musical analogies because I think painting in some ways is like learning music, learning how to play a song. You become familiar with the chord structure, the way the build is, the melody, the chorus, the turnaround. There are certain things that happen musically like that I think are great analogies for and lend themselves to kind of the build of a painting. And so you set yourself up in terms of like, well, maybe it's like first one that occurs to you is like working from background to foreground because things stack up sort of naturally. The other thing would be in terms of like reminding yourself and figuring out ways to sort of resolve complex things to simple things and developing a comfort for that, because I think a lot of us when we paint, it's too easy to just start drilling down and you think like the problem with the painting is that there's just not enough detail there, you haven't described it carefully enough, and that's the solution to make it work better, whereas it turns out a lot of times it's the inverse of that. The problem with the painting is that there's just too much going on in there, and you only needed like 14% of what you had. That's why a lot of us, when we started painting, it looks great for an hour and a half. Then you come back like 3 hours later, and it's like, geez, what happened? So usually we said too much to it, and they would, a lot of people call that, you went beyond the painting, so to speak. So, but this piece that's on the screen, this is a piece that I did. Denise and I were painting in the Pima County demonstration gardens, and just like a week ago, and they had some pots with some cannas and this sort of vining plant behind that was sort of like sweet peas or something. Now, I pushed color in some of these things just because I like the vibrations, and I feel like that's sort of my job, and to find things that are just, I like color interaction, so I don't stop at just being satisfied with local color most of the time. I guess I'm a born post-impressionist or something, but this is another version. Our Synorn Plein Air Painter Group currently has a small exhibit that's over at the Tucson Botanical Gardens, which is just a lovely place to visit. And there was a pot full of with blooming foxgloves and stuff. So another way to try to figure out how to isolate something, and this is one of the rare times too that I had to paint sitting down, which I hate doing. But this was a pot that was down close to the ground, so I had to figure out and get a chair and sort of get myself down at that level. But an example of try to sort of build big shapes and be satisfied with the fact that it's sort of like pattern painting, and there's a lot of now renowned artists that were basically ignored when they did it, but back in the Impressionist, Post-Impressionist era, where they discovered color for one thing, and broken color, and letting the eye mix those things, to where they also discovered things like Japanese prints, which are basically about pattern making and graceful and wonderful compositional flow through that. So I incorporate a lot of that design, and that expectation tends to influence my results a lot. So I tend to design things not so much like I'm focusing on trying to make it hyper realistic, even though I have a lot of training as a representational painter. I'm more interested in finding something that just looks that's delightful to look at, hopefully, that there's rhythm, that there's pattern, and that leads your eye around in that different versions of a rectangular space. So But these things are painted mostly in about a 2-hour period of time on location. This piece itself is maybe, I think this is, I think this one's 14 by 11. So, and then finished up in what I sort of tongue-in-cheek call sort of bunny strokes. There's a point even with there's sort of like an endless argument with plein air groups and painters as to what is the absolute definition of plein air painting. Some people say, it's like, well, you have to finish it on site. You can't do it. But there's an awful lot of people that I've read interviews with, very successful, notorious, competent painters who are plein air proficient, but they reach a certain point when they're painting, and they basically literally turn their pochade and their easel away from what they're doing, and they finish the painting. Which sort of leads me to the idea that I'll talk a little bit more tonight about. I was paying attention to part of my process. I got into staging and trying to rehearse things and anticipate ways in terms of building compositions and painting and subject matter to sort of hopefully be more successful at what I was doing. But I realized that all this stuff is going on. You have sort of kind of a literal conversation that nobody else hears. They just look at you and just standing there and you're moving paint around. But there's, every time we pick up a brush, we're answering a question we've asked ourselves. Where are we going to put that next stroke? What should I do next? How do I fix this? How do I move ahead, kind of thing. And it's a very personal thing, and I think a lot of artists don't either want to share it or they don't articulate it. But this is what I teach in all the workshops and stuff that I do now. Develop an awareness of that conversation that you're having in your head. Because for me, I decided that there was two distinct, they can be complementary, but you have to pay attention. One's your picture voice, one's your painting voice. Your picture voice tends to evaluate things in terms of how precisely does this really match what I'm looking at in front of me, and the expectation that we want everything to be sort of reliably photographic and under control and representational. Your painter voice loves it when you lay down a big, luscious, beautiful, wet brushstroke of impasto paint, and it's just a glorious calligraphic expression of that space that just filled on the canvas. I tend to think that I've ruined more paintings in my lifetime because I let my picture voice ignore my painter voice. And so you go, well, that's not perfect. It doesn't look exactly like what's in front of me. Whereas you should have left it alone and made the rest of the painting work for those, what I would consider more miraculous interpretive marks. And I think those marks are more connected to what people consider and describe as the muse. What is the muse? The muse is the intuitive part of us that is, and you can get metaphysical about it, I suppose, but I think it's real and I think it exists. And I think when we're in the zone, so to speak, when we're painting, when time doesn't exist and we're just so connected with the process and the relationship we have with whatever we're looking at, that we can be guided and there's just solutions that are delivered to us that you could never predict, but they're beautiful. And just like someone who's improvising on a song, who sings a phrase one day or one evening while they're performing this, that's just exquisitely just compelling and moving. It's the same way with brushwork like that. And you have to recognize and sort of step back and get over yourself in the sense that that was sort of a gift, I don't know where that comes from, but I think it's, you can explain it sort of spiritually in other ways. It is precious and it's unique. And sometimes you make brush strokes and you saw paintings in a certain way. And once you do that, you'll never do it the same way again. Just like a person who has a singing performance, they'll sing a song beautifully. They'll never sing it quite that way again. And it just makes it more precious in that sense. So when you look at art and other people's art, not necessarily mine, just everyone's and things that you're become acquainted with, it's I think it's useful to look for those kinds of things as a different measuring stick in terms of where the beauty really is and where the preciousness comes from and where the strength comes from. Because I think I worry sometimes that people don't trust their own intuitive guidelines for things. They think they love that, but I don't know. There's this other way to do that that's much more literal, and maybe I should do that because nobody else will understand that if I buy this painting that's too interpretive or something like that. But that's kind of what makes me get up in the morning. I just totally believe in the value of that. And I believe in the power of that, and I believe in some ways that has nothing to do with me personally or being, any kind of notoriety you get from being clever with a brush or something like that. That there is kind of a spiritual power to that. That for me sort of confirms that altruism and idealism and the limitness of the power of aesthetics and beauty is real and it's meaningful and it kind of gives us all. Denise and I, for all the things that are going on these days that could make people depressed. We just decided one day, it's just like, painting is like the most optimistic thing I can think of doing. It's a pursuit of something that just honors the expectation that, that wonder in life is valuable and is precious. And anyway, it just that's what makes me get up every day. I know it sounds kind of naive, maybe, and idealistic, but I'm sticking with it. So, anyway, up on the screen here, I have a tendency to just go on and on about that, but I love talking about it. My colleague Denise came up a few years ago with this brilliant idea, and when she first told me about it, it was like, oh my God, it's like, I can't believe that I didn't think of that. It just seems like it should be like such low-hanging fruit, but it's like I'd never heard of it from anybody's mouth before. But it's this wonderful idea, Paint Arizona Day. And she has this concept envision this concept of encouraging people, whether they're novices or whether they're seasoned painters, to go out on one day a month, one day a year in Arizona. Anywhere, it could be in your backyard, it could be, at some famous location, and just emote and do an attempt of any kind of art in any genre that you could possibly be comfortable with, or just to experience that attempt of being in the moment and mixing paint and enjoying color and then encouraging people to sort of post some of this stuff. And we're on I think the third year now. We just finished the third year. And there's a website, Paint Arizona Day, if you're curious to find out about that. Sort of lists and it shows a map of the state, and it has a pinpoint where all the hosts went, because people like myself and Denise and a lot of other people sort of agree to become hosts to go to certain places if people want somebody to paint with, they're alongside of. But there's people that just go out all over the place, and there was like, I don't know, 400 or 500 people involved this last year, just at that moment on any day, from ages from 5-year-old kids to fully formed adults like us. So, but but it's pretty amazing. And later this week we're going back up and hopefully meet with some legislators and hopefully we'll have a chance to maybe even the governor and sort of run this idea past because. She came up with this idea, and ever since I thought about it, I was like, this would make a great state holiday, wouldn't it? Paint Arizona Day. Because a lot of people are familiar with street musicians, and everybody sort of takes it, musicians and music and stuff. It's just sort of common knowledge. Oh, yeah, we that. People think about artists and visual painters and visual artists, and they're kind of like, well, I don't know what that's. They're afraid to come up and talk to you half the time, because it's like, oh, I don't know what to say, or. But we want to make that more commonplace so people have this sense of connection to it, of ease to it, openness to it. And sort of my own personal view is that I think just about everybody is capable of a world-class visual art statement. The difference between people who do it, who get recognized for it, is that they sort of practiced it enough to be able to do it on a more consistent basis. Because there is a science to it, just like there is science to music. And so it's just good to encourage that. And now that I got involved with more plein air groups and a lot of this, because I met Denise and she has a group of her own that she's run called the Tucson Barrio Painters, and I'll talk about that a little later. Just to encourage that sort of community to that. So there's more to painting that has to do with recognizing and honoring the connection that it gives us all, and there's a truth to plein air painting that I've discovered, especially with the barrio painters, to be able to go downtown and paint people's yards and stuff, and have them come out of their houses and go, "What are you doing?" I was like, "I can't believe you. Are you painting my house?" It's just like they just never thought that anybody would care, And it sets up this conversation and this rapport and this acknowledgement of a mutual recognition and self-worth and empathy and compassion to that. That's just like indescribably reassuring and inspiring and satisfying. You can't come away from those things without feeling some restored faith in humanity and the purpose of being alive and connected that way. So anyway, I've grown to really appreciate that. On the screen, this is an example I've painted out as a host at the Arizona Sonoran Desert Museum the last 2 or 3 years. And this is sort of an example of a couple hours out there in some of their garden areas. This is from this year or so. It was a cloudy day out there, and there was a little bit of sun that popped through every once in a while, but kind of way to come up with a shorthand design of yuccas and cactuses that are out in that area. We also paint, we've become very acquainted with a city down south of us, Bisbee, Arizona, which has their own plein air event that happens every October, and they have an art community that happens down there that we've participated in as a larger group. I think one year the Sonoran Plein Air Painter Groups that I'm president of now, that Denise used to be president of before me, we were down there one year, and I think there was like 20 of us or something that showed up. So it was a little overwhelming, but it was fun to be down there as a group, and then meet all the people that were organizing this event locally. So it's another way. Art becomes a way to sort of connect communities together, and we've also experienced that a little bit with a group called the Desert Plain Air Association that's in Southern California, out of Palm Desert, Palm Springs area. That they've created a really vibrant group down there, and they've really upped their game and turned it into a national competition this last year, bringing in seasoned painters from all over the country and stuff. And but it's the same kind of community. We go down there, and half the reason we go is just it's just nice to be connected to that, to know that that's happening all over the place right now. So it's a vibrant time for the arts, I think. Picture here a couple scenes. I jokingly, after I did this piece, there's a lot of steep roads in Bisbee, and there's this one particular strange trapezoided shaped building that's like literally like right in the middle of the road, and then the road splits, and it's like, and I was painting at the end of the day, and I had reached a certain point in the painting where I was painting kind of more literally, and I got frustrated with myself, and the light was going away, and I ended up just giving myself permission to be wildly interpreted. And it ended up sort of more Van Gogh-ish. Yeah. So I called this painting Vincent's House. So that's the story behind that. The one to the right of it is sort of an homage to classic Bisbee. There's just like, thousands of staircases in that town. So if you ever want to run stairs, go to Bisbee. One more, this is a building, I think it used to be like an old theater or something, across from where the old high school is, where the art events and stuff are celebrated and held down there now. So I just kind of like the shape. And there had a flag hanging out one of the windows there, and I'm kind of a sucker for anything where there's spots of colors and things, but I sort of like the big shapes. And it led into kind of a circular composition on this. Figures in the bottom to kind of give the whole thing scale. So, but I really enjoyed painting down there. I'll go through some examples of studio landscapes. Actually, I picked this slide for the beginning, but to tell you the truth, this was mostly a plein air piece that I did as the sun was setting one evening, and ended up pushing me to be even more interpretive than usual, and just because I had to put paint on pretty quickly. But I sort of like the big shape result of silhouettes of things and the way it stacked up. Kind of looking off towards Babakeevery Peak over in Soar West across Ava Valley. An homage to our endless, wonderful Arizona sunsets. And to tell you the truth, I spent my whole life and all through art school and for probably 3 decades after, if not more, never painting a sunset in my life, just because, it was drummed into my head. It's like, don't paint sunsets. It's just so, that's just so over the top. And, it's like, and I finally said, I want to paint sunsets. It's just like, it's a great excuse to be able to enjoy saturated colors and vibrations and kind of color keys that aren't as easy to assess in some ways. So There's different versions and variations of that kind of thing here. Some of these come out they're a little bit more exaggerated on the screens here. This is a piece that's kind of an interpretation of a thing I did, kind of looking back towards town from out my end of town. But I just sort of like the panoramic possibilities of the way the different shapes stacked up here. Same with some of these. There's a time of night. You see a lot of these that sort of have birds. I've just had like decades of memories of evening walks. And if you go out right about twilight, if you're out in an area that's still pretty pristine and kind of rural, there's just a certain time of night where all of a sudden nighthawks come out and start buzzing around, and they're catching small insects and stuff mostly. But just adding them to the scene to me, there's a dynamic to that adds a little more humanity to the piece. And this is a slide. This is our kind of our logo that came up for the Tucson Barrio Painters. And they're a group that, like I said, Denise has started and still is. She's sort of the administrator for it. It's kind of a tight-knit, but kind of, I guess, informal group in the sense that it's not like you don't have to pay dues or something like that to be part of it. It has more to do with people who have showed up every Sunday morning to have breakfast, either before or after they painted, and share their work and get involved with group shows and things off and on. But this is the group that I feel, very close to, in the sense that it steered me into different ways of looking at the way I paint now. And I was talking to Michael earlier today, this evening when I got here. We were setting up AV stuff, and we're shooting the breeze a little bit about art experiences and growth. And I said to him, there was one big surprise when I got involved with plein air painting. At the beginning, I was thinking plein air painting was like, oh yeah, that's where you go out and you do sketches and you bring them back, and it sort of helps your studio painting. And I never really thought of them too much more than that. I mean, you wanted to be competent at it and sort of have respectable results. But there was a point where I got into what I described earlier in terms of staging and becoming a little more proficient at doing more finished compositions, that I realized that all of a sudden my studio work flipped in terms of its purpose. All of a sudden when I was in the studio, I was trying to emulate what I was doing plein air. And in some ways I was practicing for plein air. And so I just never saw that one coming, when I went into it. So people who get involved with that, I mean, that's a conversation you can have with yourself. But for me personally, it changed the way I studio painted, because I wanted to get the same energy and freshness and spontaneity and kind of the distilled solution that I was getting when I painted plein air from life. So I just found somehow that was more compelling to me. And there's a picture, a fairly recent picture of outside of Cafe a la Carte, where we meet quite often to have breakfast. So, and it's a wonderful community. There's something Denise likes to refer to them as our art tribe. So It's nice to just be able to see those familiar faces, and it's like we're all on a mission. A lot of times, either if we paint before or after, everybody disperses to go do their thing, but somehow coming from that point and having it come back. Yes.
You designed the logo.
Oh. Well, that was a collaborative effort.
It was wonderful.
A piece from kind of off of Main Street, down by Franklin and Main, sort of in the Presidio area, just of rooftops and doorways that's still kind of representative of maybe the more historical remnants of the way the barrio used to look, 40, 50, 60 years ago. There's still lots of beautiful places down there, but little by little, people move in and, out of necessity, a lot of times they have to renovate them. And of course, they renovate them to sort of modern standards, and they're still beautiful, but artists like peeling paint, and I sort of like the buildings that don't have a plumb line in them, and they're all trapezoid shaped, and the buildings downtown. This one, I was happy with the result of this. It's one to sort of mix the old courthouse building, but somehow incorporate some of the skyscraper stuff that was down there. So I tried to figure out a way to use the skyscraper to sort of frame the dome. But you can see a lot of my result has less to do with an absolute fidelity to structure and surfaces. And it's more about making a sort of adventurous and risky mark, and letting that be enough. How am I doing for time here? Am I
2 or 3 more minutes.
2 or 3 more minutes? Oh no, I gotta speed it. More barrio scenes. A lot of front porches. There's a place on down in Barrio Viejo where you get down past 18th Street, and there's a short section. It's really narrow, and really great houses with porches on both sides. We painted there quite often. There was this one fellow there. If he got down at a certain time in the morning, he would come out and walk his cats, and they would sort of come out. So this was sort of an homage to the existence of those felines, kind of coming out to greet people, if you're hanging around there. So the one on the left is there's wonderful cathedral down just south of Congress on Stone. And I love looking up at buildings. I painted lots of buildings where it's kind of about looking at the eaves. I just like the perspective of that. I guess I like looking up in the air at things. And this is a little bit of exaggeration of the vanishing lines that would happen going straight up in the air. And anyway, I ended up calling that one The Light from Above. So it's the tower with a couple of birds and this wonderful statue of Mary, and then another bird down below, just sort of with all these tall palms sort of pointing out to it. It's probably, I thought about it, it's like, this was the only triptych I painted in my entire life. I guess I never exploited that as an example. And this is down in the Presidio area, and I painted this a few years back. And this particular piece won Best Buildings in the online plein air magazines show. I think it was it was 3 or 4 years ago. But just another scene, sort of modern version of kind of the barrio, somebody crossing. But I just liked, I like that sort of time of day. It's just fleeting. So And these are a couple of very small examples. These are like 5x7s or something like that, real quick studies. This is on North Meyer, and the color's a little changed from my laptop to up there, but I called this one Barrio Sherbet because this crazy sort of, it just reminded me of a bowl of ice cream or something. Barrio Viejo, with a little mural painted next to the side of the door. Kind of about the eaves again, too, here. So I just like these little vignettes. This is recently, back in January, I was talking about the show that was down in the Palm Desert, and they have sort of a 3-tiered plein air event down there. And this year, I've been in it 4 years, one honorable mention a couple times, and the year before, I didn't win anything on that. I had a great time painting down there. This year, I did a number of pieces, and I had done this one piece that was kind of heading out of town, and up in this area that's basically just like smoke bush and rocks, and it's kind of, if you're familiar with kind of down by Palm Desert and south of there, it's some of it you could consider kind of moonscape because there's not much growing there. But there was this, we had a really wet early winter, spring, and there was all this intense yellow-green grass stuff growing on the ground. And I did this scene of looking back at the hills as they were receding, and there was ravens and crows and stuff around that in the full sky. But I was lucky enough, and I was awarded best to show there, so it was a huge honor with considerable award to that. So I do still lifes too, and I enjoy just painting. I don't know if I can zoom in on these or not, shows, but I like painting things like cards and stuff and trying to figure out ways to simplify them so that just, one of my heroes, like a lot of people, is John Singer Sargent, and the way he paints faces, and he's such a consummate draftsman. But if you go to like the Metropolitan Museum of Art and you see his stuff from across the room, and then you walk up and you look at it, it's like, oh my God, he painted that face with 7 brushstrokes, How did he do that? It's sort of, I love painting and surfaces like that sort of defy, they defy expectation of what you would think it would take to accomplish that kind of an illusion. So just kind of an example. This is our Sonoran Painter Group logo, and you can go and find that online and find out about our organization and all the wonderful people. It's a group of about 160 of us that pay dues, and probably I think it's safely about 50 people who are very active and show up at paint-outs and put into shows and things like that. We just finished being out at the Sonoran Desert Ironwood gallery out there, and we're nice enough. It's really hard to get into that. It's like you have to wait like 3 or 4 years to even be invited back. But we had a wonderful show in there, and sold just under 40% of everything that was in there was purchased. That show just came down today, and they gave us like the winter time spot for that. This was an example of the piece, and I got best to show what that event for this piece there too. The left piece is the piece that's on the easel here, and the right piece is another piece that was at the Tierra Seca show that's looking south in Mexico there. Painters painting painters. one of my pastimes. I was actually originally trained in college. I spent all my time in life drawing classes and drawing people and portraiture and all this. I didn't start doing landscapes till I moved to Arizona years later. But with the plein air groups, like on the left, it's a recent one at Botanical Gardens, a small piece that I painted of Denise painting. On the right is Sue Johnson downtown painting one of the theaters on Main Street down there. I just sort of liked the abstract pattern that I saw there. Another older plein air piece, like 12 by 16 of Denise, and then out of the Sonoran Desert Museum, where she's painting something, and I couldn't think of anything to paint, so I turned around and started painting her. So, and a couple more examples of Denise. There's lots of paintings of Denise because I paint next to her a lot. And finish it up here with the logo for our current studio gallery, my working studio, Studio 6 Gallery that's in the Axel Art Building. And it's open for, then you can go that and find that online to, if you're curious to come down, and we encourage you to come visit. It's by appointment only because it is a working studio with lots of other places and stuff in there. So it's, you can't just like come down, because usually the doors are locked and alarm systems and all this stuff. But we'd love to be able to see you either at one of our planned openings or make an appointment to come down. So, and I'm getting the signal here that I'm overrunning everybody's patience. So, anyway, you've been a lovely audience, and thank you again for having me as a speaker. And I hope maybe this has encouraged you.
Question from anybody?
All right. Do you all use the same medium in plein air?
Do we all use the same medium when we paint art? No, there's people who paint pastels in our group. There's people who paint watercolor, paint gouache. I think the overwhelming majority paint oil, like myself. I prefer oil just because I've become very acquainted with painting wet into wet, and I like the fact that oils don't dry quickly. So, but no, we don't limit it to that, and obviously there's lots of different ways to pursue that.
Chuck.
Yeah, I have a question about, when you paint a sunset, if you decide that you're going to paint a sunset, you know that the hundreds of thousands of painters have painted sunsets. Do you worry about what you can say about a sunset that hasn't been said before or expressed before?
Do I worry about being original? No, I don't. Either it's because I'm egotistical, or I'm just so committed to trusting that my own autographic interpretation and result will take care of itself. I mean, there's a point where after you've done it 10,000 times, that you trust your instincts about what it is. And I tell you the truth, and I tell this to a lot of people that I teach art to and have workshops. It really helps to be sort of in love with what you're pointing yourself at. You have to care. You have to be emotionally invested in what you're going to try to convey, what you're going to try to capture. And the more you're connected with that kind of empathy, I think the rest of it sort of takes care of itself. I think, and you have to trust that the universe has kind of got your back, And it's not necessarily an easy thing to do. Just like playing piano or something is not necessarily an easy thing to do, but there's a certain point where you've just developed your own vocabulary, I guess. So, but no, I don't really. When you ask me that, no. Do I worry that this looks like somebody else? No. No.
Patrice.
I just had a thought with the Tucson Airport Authority. with your Paint Arizona.
Yeah.
What if you had talked to them about displaying the top 10 award winners and get a permanent spot at the Tucson airport?
Okay.
Maybe
Talk to Denise. That's a great idea.
Here, and it would be so
Yeah.
interesting for tourists.
Yeah. Yeah.
And coming either to light, coming
Yeah.
out.
Great idea.
I think it's a wonderful idea. And
Great
I'd run, yeah.
Some possible partnerships with our art supplies project and our scholarships too. And Patty, I'm so grateful to Patty for finding you.
Oh, thanks.
And I'm grateful that you now know a little bit more about Friends of Western Art.
Oh, yeah.
I think there's a lot of really neat synergy possibilities here, especially working with kids and aspiring artists. And I hope we can stay in touch.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
Um,
Thank you again for having. It's just, it's
coming, being part of.